them to see if they're coming? Yeah,
We're live.
All right. Committee, are we ready to convene?
Yes, we are.
All the Finance Committee meeting to order. All members are present and accounted for. We have debt service and the capital budget CIP on our agenda for today. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We have minutes from yesterday's meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the 21st of April?
Move to approve the minutes as written.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. So I'm not sure, Takia, do we have people from Davenport here so we can go through that? Oh my gosh, we have a,
Yes.
That
We
is-
have-
oh, so that is not Jennifer Dirksen. That's the Jennifer you were referring to.
Oh, sorry. Then no.
Okay, then I've just emailed them and asked them who's getting on.
and will we be showing the debt capacity update on screen?
Yes.
Julian? Thank you.
I do have two phone numbers here. Actually, if you guys bear with me 1 second, I'm going to see who these two phone numbers are. This might be Davenport. I've just turned on a number ending in 9050. Who is this?
That's me, Jennifer Garrison. Hi,
Okay.
good morning.
Okay, good morning. All right, great. So we have that, and then give me 1 more second. Just turn on a number ending in 9693. Who is this?
Yep, good morning, it's Joe Mason with Davenport.
Okay, so we have Davenport with us as well.
Morning, Joe.
Good morning.
Morning, Joe. Will we be able to see Joe and Jennifer?
No, there's just phone numbers. They're just calling in.
They dialed in.
All right. Will they be able to see the debt capacity update when we put it on screen? In other words, how are they going to lead us through the discussion?
That is a good question.
They can
We
use,
have it in front of us.
if you use the one that I sent you yesterday, they can lead you by page numbers.
Well,
Is that,
can we
Joe,
ask
does
them real
that-
quick?
That works for me, as long as it works for you.
Does Julian have the one that was sent yesterday?
Yes.
Yes.
Excuse me, can anybody send that to the those of us from the fact who are here so we can follow along?
Yes.
Fred, it will be on your screen as well.
Oh, okay, very good, thank you.
But Fred, we will send that to you so you have that as well. I'll forward it to you right now.
I feel like we're doing this a little bit by braille, but Joe, are you ready to have us put the presentation up and you can, I hope, lead us through it by page?
Yes, we're ready to go. Jennifer's going to lead the presentation discussion, and I'll add some color commentary or answer questions along the way.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I just logged in through my computer so I can see it on my screen as well. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing Joe and I to join your meeting today. We really appreciate it. We just wanted to walk you through our annual debt capacity update to show you what the impact of the expected or projected capital improvement plan will have on the city's primary debt metrics. If you turn to page 1, you will see a chart there which shows on the left-hand side the city's existing debt service. That includes the debt that's related to the general fund, the docked fund, and the market fund. And you can see here that it's a declining debt service, which is a positive because it allows for additional debt to sort of be layered on in the coming years. If you look over to the next column, we've identified the new debt service here based on the projected fiscal year 21 to 26 capital improvement plan, assuming that the bonds are issued annually, and this also includes the last tranche of the equipment lease as well. And just some assumptions for this new debt service column that we included. We were very conservative on the interest assumptions. We expected a 3% for fiscal 21, 3.5% for fiscal 22, and 5% thereafter. So that builds in some level of conservatism going forward. We also, if you continue looking in that chart, you'll see general fund expenditures. This is an estimate. It starts with the estimate for fiscal 21 and then is a 1% increase thereafter. This 1%, annual increase in expenditures is also conservative, as expenditures have typically grown more than 1%. And, just to give you an example, last year we were expecting fiscal 21 expenditures to be around 81 million, but it looks like the current estimate is about 86 million.
Jennifer, Jennifer, can I stop you on this interest rate assumptions? 5% seems like a lot, particularly given what the Fed is doing with quantitative buying and all of the reaction. Is there a reason for assuming 5%? I don't think we've been at 5% for a long time.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Joe?
I was just gonna, so we're trying to introduce an element of conservatism to make sure that your debt ratios remain in line with the policy guidance. 3% in this market, which is what we have, if you'll read the footnote at the bottom of the page, that's our assumption for fiscal year 2021. 20-year level payment structure, you're looking at somewhere between the low and middle 2% range if you were to sell bonds today. So 3% gives a reasonable cushion. And then for 22, as noted, we've bumped it to 3.5. One could make a case that given all that's going on in the world right now, that we might have a recession that might last some period of time. The 5% thereafter really reflects the unknowable. I mean, I will tell you that while interest rates are very low right now, we had about a month-long dislocation in the municipal market that was almost unique to municipal bonds, where the first 2 or 3 weeks of March, interest rates for tax-exempt municipal bonds went up 200 basis points literally within 2 to 3 weeks. So while you're correct in your assertion that rates overall are low and should remain low, one can never time the market, and you could be selling into a market where rates are going up at a rapid pace. So that's why we inject conservatism into the estimates. I don't know, hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So then just continuing to look at that same page, number 1, you'll see that we utilize the total debt service column and then the general fund expenditures to get debt service as a percentage of expenditures. And you can see there that it's remaining below 11%, which, the metrics overall look better from last year, in part because, as I mentioned, due to the expenditure growth. So if you turn to the next page, we give you a graphic portrayal of this. You can see that the city's debt policy is to maintain debt service to expenditures on slide 2 between 10 and 12%. And you can see there that you remain below that, 11% bar.
Slide
Next
two,
page,
please.
please.
Next slide.
Yeah, so you can see there, the gold bar represents the 11%, which is obviously the middle of the city's policy, and you remain sort of right there or below. So there's definitely, enough capacity within your current policy, which is a positive from a rating agency standpoint. If there are no questions on slide 2, if you could turn to
Yeah,
slide 3, please.
Jennifer, this is Fred Suffman. I just have a question as a novice here. Looking at slide 2 and the bar chart, and we see, understandably, that the numbers go down out through 2046. Am I to assume correctly that if and when the city issues new debt in out years, those green bars will increase closer to the 10%?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yes. Obviously this is only taking into account what you're issuing through, 2026, but, as you do each year, your CIP will include, bond issuances for, 27 through 2046. So this is just including what we know of now, but in theory, yes, that would be closer to the 10%.
Fred?
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if this will clarify anything or not, but this includes everything that's in the capital budget and the CIP out to those 5 years in the CIP. So as we go and add new projects onto the end or add new projects into those interim years, those bars will definitely come up. So this
That's what I assumed, but I just wanted to make sure I was right.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I interject
Okay.
here for a second? Takia, for the CIP portion, did we invite anybody from the Planning Commission? They usually also sit in on that because they're supposed to review it and give advice back to the council.
No, no one notified me.
Alderman Arnett,
Yes.
we have a formal presentation to the Planning Commission. I think it's on May 5th.
Okay.
But we're on their agenda so we can do the formal presentation like we do every year so that they can hear it and then they have to submit a letter of concurrence with the CIP.
Okay, I was just thinking how happy I am to have some of the members of the FAC here and then realize maybe we should have somebody from the Planning Commission, but it sounds like you have that under control. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, and then just looking at slide 3, this shows another scenario that instead of annual bond issuances, this assumes that a bond anticipation note, which is a short-term debt product, which we've talked about before in previous meetings, which is interest only, are issued ahead of long-term bonds. So you would issue these bands initially, and then take the bands out, refinance them with long-term debt, and this is a way to, manage your debt service to expenditures.
Jen?
Yes.
The slide 3 that they have up here now is just showing
yes.
the debt capacity. I think you want to move to the next.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. Okay.
Oh no, the next one.
So, yeah, I'm a little confused here.
Yeah. So, Alderman Arnett, the first scenario you saw was as if we would be selling bonds, 20-year bonds, in the year that the CIP has them programmed. And I asked Davenport to present a second scenario because the city, I plan on selling bands, some kind of short-term debt every other year because I don't think the city's issues are large enough to sell them every year. So I asked her to work through that scenario and show the same result, the same graph, so you can see what that looks like.
So I'm glad you're speaking to that because it seems every year bands are in or bands are out. It sounds like bands are back. And I think bands make sense because we want to do that little bit of funding up front, the no interest funding, and then when we really start putting the capital project in place, we can issue the bonds. So is it the position of the finance department and the city manager that bands are back in vogue?
So that is what we are planning. If, depending on what interest rates did, that might shift the plans. But every time we go long-term bonds, there's a lot more work involved and a lot of fees with the rating agencies, et cetera. And it's just less expensive to do it every other year. And on that every other year plan, when we sell the long-term bonds, we liquidate the bands and pay off those and turn them into long-term bonds. So
Okay.
it's just easier to manage from this end and less expensive.
And from the public works perspective, it makes a lot of sense because instead of having to get all the money up front and then we're sitting on this cash, what seems like forever as the projects move forward, you have the band to back it up. You don't have this big stash of cash that you're sitting on, and it's easier to manage the projects that way.
Right, and that's why Davenport recommended the bands to us in the first place.
Right.
But Jody, it seems like it gives you and Public Works a lot more flexibility depending upon what interest rates are and where we are in terms of the projects actually moving forward.
Correct.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from the Finance Committee or the FACT at this point? All right, sorry to keep interrupting you, but this is helpful.
No worries. If we could go back to the slide that's labeled debt capacity, that would be helpful. I think it was maybe slide 3 on the screen. Okay, great. So on this slide, we have laid out the city's debt capacity, and this is without taking into account the current CIP, just to give you an idea of what your overall capacity is at just with your existing debt profile. And just to note, we're assuming a 20-year amortization with level payment structure at 5%. Again, that interest rate is conservative, as Mr. Mason had mentioned earlier. And you can see here that at each policy level, between the 10 and 12%, that gives the city somewhere between 35 and just under 57 million of current debt capacity.
Can you explain the leftmost row of numbers, the column for 2021 debt service, and then below that, is that an accumulate? What is that 21 million?
That's under the 12% policy.
Well, that's
so
how
in
much
fiscal
we could do. All right, I got you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Of course. If there are no other questions on slide 3, if you could turn to slide 4.
Could I just ask a quick question if possible?
Oh, sure, of course.
Ross, is that cool?
Yeah, of course, please.
Could you, so would we be, are we aiming at a certain policy level, or are we on one in particular right now, or?
Maybe we could flip back.
So
Back that chart on page 4 that shows the level debt.
Page 2, the graph, the bar graph.
Page
2 or 3, whatever that bar graph was on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can address this question, Alderman Gay. This shows our policy is to attempt to keep our debt service expenditures equal to 10% of revenues. But the cap is 12%. So this graph shows you that our target's always 10, we are above 10, but we're not near our 12% cap. Okay, that's what our policy states.
Awesome, thank you very much for that.
And interestingly enough, the cap is as a percent of expenditures. And so every year when we increase expenditures, we give ourselves more headroom in this cap, which I'm not sure is exactly the metric we want to do, but that's a whole different discussion.
Yes, and if I could add, the 10 to 12% that the city utilizes for its policy is in line with what other local governments as well as the rating agencies look for. So the city is not an outlier in its debt to expenditure policy. Okay, any additional questions before we move on?
Yeah, could I just ask a quick question on that? So our bond rating is tied to the 10%? Our good bond rating is tied to the 10 versus the 12?
No, 10 to 12%. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Mm-hmm. If we move forward to the proposed borrowing, yes, thank you. On slide 4, this is the city's proposed borrowing for 21 fiscal years 21 through 26. And you can see here that the total amount is about 36.8, which is well within, the 56 million, which was the 12% range on the previous slide, which allows it to remain sort of around that no greater than the 11% sort of mid range of that 10 to 12% debt service to expenditure policy. And if you turn the page to slide 5, then this is just showing the city's additional debt capacity. So once you take into account the fiscal 21 to 2026 borrowing, what additional capacity does the city have for issuing any debt on top of that at each of these respective levels? And you can see, obviously, that amount is just less than 400,000 for the 10% level. And then it goes all the way up to about 22 million at the 12% level. So if for some reason, there was a project that came up that needed to be funded, there is still a pretty significant amount of debt capacity there that could be utilized, which is a credit positive as well.
So Dewan, if you go back to thinking about the bar chart, it's that room that we have with the bars as we go out below the 10% line, the 11% line, and the 12% line. So the 22 million down here is if we went all the way up to 12%.
And on the last slide, and this is just an out there question. So if we can borrow up to 56 million, I think it was, and we were within range of, on the last slide, I think it showed like 20 or 30. Does that mean if necessary, we could borrow up to that 56,000 mark to put us at the red line? Not saying that we would, but if necessary, would we be able to do so?
You could, but yes, I think, trying to stay below that 12% level, and I think the city is normally targeted to be around that 11% level, gives that flexibility. If for some reason you are at the 12% level and then something unexpected came up, that doesn't really give the city any sort of headroom to issue any additional debt. So keeping a little bit of capacity there for, unexpected needs is, something just to consider as you move forward.
Right. I think that's the end of the presentation. Is that not right?
That is correct. If anyone has additional questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Joe, I want to ask Joe if we can talk about the uncertain future and what we think. I think we're already probably by definition in a recession. I think the next question is, do we go into a prolonged Great Recession? It took state and local governments from the last downturn in 2009 to 2016 or thereabouts to get back to normal. And so is there any kind of cautionary word that you would give us as our advisors about being even more conservative than we have been over the past, or just how are you looking at the crystal ball for the future.
Well, I don't have a perfect crystal ball about what's going to happen. I don't think anybody does, but I think you're right. We are, if it's not been technically defined yet, everybody believes we're in a recession. Of what magnitude and what duration remains to be seen. That's largely a function of how long we are all shuttered up at home and not, don't have a fully functioning economy. I think that that situation calls for prudence and caution in budgeting, particularly on some of the more economically sensitive revenues. As a city, you're in a better position than, say, your adjoining or surrounding county, because you're less reliant on what is probably, other than the sales tax, the most economically sensitive revenue source. To be certain, you get a share of income tax, but it's not nearly, you're not nearly as exposed as county governments are in Maryland, as well as the state itself. So I think that's one major issue. But I think if you look at your revenues across the board, I think it's a time where you want to be careful about how far out on the revenue collection curve you go in terms of things like tourism and parking revenues and transit revenues and things of that nature, because when there's no economic activity and nobody's able to visit and enjoy beautiful Annapolis, that's going to be a revenue hit. And, I think being cautious in that regard will go a long way towards helping you muddle through this.
Do we have any historical data on the size of the revenue hit from the housing bubble? Were we down about 10%, 20%? Do we have anything? Because it seems like that is probably a reasonable guide. I actually think this is going to be a worse economic hit, but that would certainly be a guide to tell us what happened to us the last time we hit something like this.
I can tell you that the information is available. I don't have it right now at my fingertips, but I would also say that this is different than the last time around, because in that case, the property values tanked. I mean, they really tanked. And depending on where you were on that reassessment schedule, you had a delayed effect on the revenues of the municipalities and the counties. This is for us, it's a tourism issue. It's a little bit of an income tax issue. We will see that play out in the income taxes for the next couple of years, but we have a tourism issue. So as we can get people back into Annapolis, that will help us tremendously. And we have been relatively conservative with those estimates, and we don't know exactly how quickly people are going to get back out.
This is an assessment year, though, right? The state is assessing us. I think they have to have it done by the end of the year.
Yeah, so in FY21, the state will be reassessing our properties to take effect in 22. And then we'll have an idea on if this is having an impact on property values at all.
It certainly seems like it would have to have some impact on commercial real estate. But I think in this regard, we've been so reliant on property taxes that we've worried about it. But I think you're right, Jody. We are actually being protected by that reliance as long as residential property values don't get hit. We will know, I guess, by the end of the year, and certainly in time for next year's budget. Yes.
Ross, yeah. So the good news in this, I believe, is that the pandemic does not affect our debt service. And it would be safe to say that the pandemic affects our revenue only. Is that a correct statement?
Well, but our revenue is what we use to pay our debt service.
Yeah.
But we're still paying off our debt.
Yeah, we have to. So if we take a revenue hit, and debt service is now one of our larger programs, it's equal in size or bigger than most of our departments. It's certainly not with police, fire, and DPW, but it is a big program. So yeah, we can't take a revenue hit and continue to make our payments. I see, Duan, you have your hand up, please.
Do the debt programs not cooperate with us during, like, you know, national emergencies like this? Would they, I don't know, like say, hey, you can pay half this month or something like that? I know that we're a city and they probably expect us to have that in the bank, but would they cooperate if worst case scenario?
I think that's a question for Joe. I don't, you know, I guess it depends upon how dire things get. They may not have a choice.
Well, I can tell you that, well, with our revenue flow, one of the first things we have to be concerned is paying our debt. And Joe, you can comment on that as well. That would be the first thing we pay.
Yeah, there's, unlike some of the programs that have been talked about at the federal level, either through the Federal Reserve or the Treasury, where you know, there are loans going out to businesses that are forgivable if you maintain your same level of employment through the month of September. No such product currently exists for state and local governments. You know, your credit ratings and your debt, the overwhelming majority of the city's debt profile is general obligation bonds. And what that means is that you give your full faith and credit and unlimited ad valorem tax pledge to repay the debt on time and in full. So there's no forbearance here. There's no way to get a temporary reprieve. It has to be, you know, your first priority. Which is not to say that there aren't programs out there in some stage. The Federal Reserve has expressed a willingness to buy state and local government obligations to support the municipal market if that's required. They've intervened in the very short-term market already, but they have not, at least to my knowledge, started buying long-term debt issues. There's also what's called a municipal liquidity facility that has been put out there by the Federal Reserve to provide near-term cash flow support to state and local governments, although the program as it's currently conceptualized does not appear to flow down to the level of virtually any county in Maryland or any city or town in Maryland, just the way it's designed. It's designed to go to the states and the largest counties and cities in the country, but stay tuned on that. That is evolving. It may open up a little bit more, and we're getting a little bit beyond the concept or the topic, I should say, of today's conversation, but I'm just trying to give you a feel for what federal programs are out there to, to help the situation. But the answer to the question is, as Ms. Dickinson stated, you've got to pay your debt service on time and in full, and that's the first call on revenues that come in the door.
Could you just repeat the name of that? You said it was the municipal, I couldn't hear the second word, facility?
Yes, it's called the Municipal Liquidity Facility. And it's a $500 billion program established by the Federal Reserve. It's supported by an appropriation, I believe it's in the CARES Act, but don't quote me on that, but Congress has appropriated dollars to provide support to the Fed to roll out these various programs. But thus far, the only eligible borrower under that facility is the state of Maryland. And we've been having some conversations with the treasurer's office, but I think everyone is waiting to, there's an expectation that the Fed will be issuing further guidance and modifications to that program. We sort of hoped it would be sometime this week, but that information could drop virtually any day.
All right.
Obviously, we'll keep the city's staff informed as to what's available and what's not, should it become needed.
Ellie, did you have your hand up?
I did very quickly. In our capital budget in fiscal year 2023, this is probably a question for David, Gerald. There's a $4 million.
Well, why don't we wait till we get to that part of the agenda?
Well, I just want to make sure our debt calculation includes that bump up in fiscal year 2023. I mean, the debt calculation saw the capital improvement budget, right?
So that $4 million that you're referring to, I think is the city dock project, and that will be Resilience Finance Authority funding. So that doesn't count towards our limits.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Your question is, I think, a good segue to moving to the CIP and the capital budget. But before that, are there any last questions for Davenport? Otherwise, I wish we could be seeing you in council chambers at the table like we usually do, but we thank you.
As do we, Alderman Arnett, as do we.
So can I add a little first before they get off the line? To clarify, I think that the presentation that Julian put up onto the screen was not the second one I sent around. It was the first one. In the second one, there was a second scenario where we used bans first and then bonds. And that is a more favorable picture of what would happen with debt service expenses. So we don't have to talk about that now, but if you take a few minutes and look at that second scenario, that'll be a more realistic picture of what would happen with our debt service expenditures, and it brings the debt service down a bit. So, anyways, I just wanted to bring that to your attention, and that was the confusion on the presentation.
That's the one that on page 3 says debt service policy compliance dash including bans.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's a bar graph for that on page 4. And that you can see that the bars are slightly lower.
Right. Okay. I was wondering how we skipped that, but
yeah, it's not in the one on the screen, which is where the confusion came with the page numbers and stuff. So anyways, there's anybody who got that presentation can take a look through it later.
All right. All right. Thank you, Joe and Jennifer, and hope we'll see you under better circumstances the next time.
Our wish as well. Thank you for your time and attention this morning.
All right, so now it's time to move to the presentation on the CIP and the capital budget, which we have in our budget binder. I hope everybody has that in front. Jody or David, how do you plan to lead us through this?
Yeah, I'm going to kick this off. Marcia and I are going to tag team on this presentation. If we could go ahead and put that up on the screen, that would be helpful. I'm going to do the sort of the high level overview, and then Marcia's going to work through the projects that are funded in FY21. So that's how this presentation is set up. She has her project managers also online. So if you have any detailed questions about any of these FY21 projects, they will be available to help answer those as well. So if you could go on to the next slide, please. So this is all of the general fund projects that are to be funded or requested to be funded in FY21. General fund projects, but these are funded by a lot of different sources. I'm going to get into that on the next slide. But you'll see that this is a pretty robust year, and these are a lot of projects for Public Works to manage on top of the ones that they are already managing. Some of these are continuing projects that are in different stages of implementation. And some of them are new projects. So we'll again talk about that as we move forward. But $16.25 million of general fund projects, again, funded by a variety of sources. So if we could go to the next slide, that will be the enterprise fund projects for FY21. And these are by the different categories of enterprise funds. So parking meters come from the parking fund. Organics recovery is going to be both from the solid waste fund and from the sewer fund. And you'll hear more about that project because I think that's an exciting project for the city. Our normal water distribution rehab project, stormwater retrofit and MS4 permits, those are all annual appropriations towards those projects. And then the Truxton Heights storm drain project that we talked a little bit about the other day. If you could move on to the next slide, please. So this shows where the funding is coming from both of those sets of projects. So for the general fund, the bond funding from that 16.25 million is about 7.7 million. The enterprise funds are paying for part of that, and we'll talk more about how that's happening, that they're contributing to these general fund projects. Some pay-go from the enterprise funds, and we'll talk about that as well. Pretty robust amount of grants, about 2.2 million, 1.7 million from the Capital Reserve Fund. And then we have the CRAB project, which the 1.3 million is program open space from the county. In FY20 current year, the city contributed 500,000 of program open space towards CRAB. This is the county's contribution in 21. And then they also got a state grant for acquisition and for construction for CRAB. And then the enterprise funds.
Where is that CRAB? Are they still, what is it, in DNR or?
They're still in DNR, yeah. We've recently provided some additional information that they've asked for. And so DNR is still considering whether that use qualifies for program open space money.
If it does not,
these are the routine annual projects that we do, water distribution, so forth. You can see we're transitioning towards pay-go for some of those projects in past years. A lot more of that was funded by bonds. I think we still need to fund some of those with bonds because those are long-term projects. You know, some of those water projects, water line replacement projects should last, 75 to 80 years. So there's some generational equity issues associated with that. We don't want to fund all of those with pay-go, but we're trying to balance that. So you can see that in those numbers.
Sheila's trying to get in. Sheila?
Yeah, just a quick question. David, you mentioned 500,000 from the city. In which category does that money fall? Is it open space money?
It's program open space money. It's not shown on here because it was FY20. It was in the FY20 CIP, the current CIP. So we committed that funding for this year. So these are FY21 amounts for CRAB, county and state.
Okay, I thought
you can see that on page 10 of the budget under, I guess it's like 7 or 8 lines down. You can see that 500,000 project open space money from last year.
Yeah, but he mentioned it as he was going through this list, which would suggest that it was in one of these categories. So that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah. So that was program open space, and DNR is looking at both of those amounts: the 500,000 from the city and the 1.3 million from the county when they're determining whether they can use that type of money. Next slide, please. Okay, so I will turn it over to Marcia, and she's going to walk through the specific FY21 projects.
Okay, thank you.
So the first project, and by the way, they're organized by fund and then they're alphabetical. So the first project is Barbud Lane. It's been around, it's come and gone a couple times. This one we've been working on for a couple years during this phase. One of the things you have to remember about this project, the cost has gone up, and that is due to, a lot of it is in part to our stormwater regulations that have increased. I have our project manager ready if you have specific questions, but I think one of the things you have to remember is that we need money in FY 21 and 22 in order for this project to move forward, because it's kind of an all or nothing. So if anyone has any questions, we can answer them, or we can move on to the next slide.
Duan, are you still on with us? Well, this is Duan's ward, and it's something that Kenny championed for years and years and years, and I'm happy to see we have plans to move forward on it.
Ross, may I ask a question about this? Because you're right, this was Kenny's project for forever. I'm looking at the chart on page 10. So the 660 was the original appropriation for this project. Has that been expended?
I'm going to call in Jen Fight right now.
Sheila, it's probably easier to look at page 15 because that lays it all out. It's the first one in the CIP book, the first project.
So
Jen will have the details of that, but we're expending that. We're not expending the full 660 for the design. We're expending a part of that, but as we do the design, we're getting a better cost estimate, and that's why we're asking for these additional funds. But Jen can tell you how much of the 660 that we're spending for design.
So design so far has been about 120,000.
Okay. So that does answer my question. So these are preliminary costs, and it sounds like it's 650 instead of 660. But these new dollars are necessary to finish the project. So I get it. Thank you.
Okay, I guess we'll move on to the next slide. This project is the Burtis House, located right at City Dock. So we're anticipating that the ownership will transfer from the state to the city during this year. And we need to study the design and preservation of the building. And we're hoping to get some grants from the National Park Service and the state of Maryland. And we would like to have rehab funding for FY 23 as part of the city dock revitalization. Next slide, please. Oh, okay. This next slide, I think, is Alderman Poon's, one of his requests, and is to install a 5-foot sidewalk from Window Avenue to Halsey Road. We are seeking some Safe Routes to School grants, which hopefully will pay for 75% of the project. It's a new project, and the city share of the project, if we do receive the grants, is almost $72,000.
What a lovely neighborhood.
Yeah.
It just needs another sidewalk.
Yes. Okay. Next project. Okay, so this one is it's kind of a catch-all for city facility improvements. And this handles all kinds of projects. Most of the ones we've done lately have been at the fire stations. I think they've been neglected for years. And we're proposing to increase the funding from $300,000 a year to $500,000 a year in order just to keep up. You know, our buildings are all older and do need a lot of work. So the projects planned for FY21 include more fire station improvements and some repairs to God's Garage.
Marcia, did we skip bulkhead, city dock bulkhead?
That's the,
Alderwoman Finlay, yeah, we're
if you're
just covering the ones that are proposed for funding in 21. So if they're not
Okay.
proposed for funding, then they're not on the list.
Okay. Thank you.
Correct. If you have any questions, though, you know, we're here to answer them. Okay, so we'll move on to the next project, which is next slide, please. So this one is a new project. It's for city facility security upgrades. As you know, we're inching our way towards being more secure, and we are requesting funding $100,000 per year. And some things are at the end of their service life. Some things will be improved. This one's pretty important to keep everybody and all of our buildings safe.
Marcia, does this include any planning for allowing staff to come back into the building from the Hillman Garage side? Certain alderpersons come in that way all the time, but I watch the staff go around to the front of the building.
I don't think
the
it
answer
does.
is yes. The answer is
sorry.
yes. Yeah, the answer is yes. We're not ready to disclose completely, but right now the thought is that the main entrance will actually move to the back. The front entrance will normally be closed and the guard will be at the back.
All right, that's very interesting. Thank you, David.
All right. Next slide.
This per year, how long does it plan to extend out to?
Well, as we install things, so, you know, this is a process to do installations at various facilities. And then, you know, as you install things, they do reach the end of their useful life, or things are upgraded or whatever. So this is proposed to be an annual cost.
Dewan, do you have your budget binder? Because if you do, this is on page 20 of the CIP, and it shows it going out every year through 26. Page 20.
Okay.
Yeah, so this project will become like roadways, like sidewalks, like water lines, like sewer, and like facilities where we need to fund a certain amount. We have a big backlog. We need to invest in this each year. This is a pretty modest investment in the security system. We'll see how it goes if we're able to keep up, but this is proposed to be indefinite like those other projects.
May I ask, David, and it's not just for City Hall, it's for all of our facilities, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, so this is the one that Deputy Chief Herman was talking about yesterday that they felt was really important. We put it in as an enhancement to their operating budget. We moved it out of there and moved it into the CIP, but we agree this is a very important project for all city facilities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving on, please.
Okay, so our next project proposed for funding is the City Harbor flood mitigation. And it's to protect tidal flooding along Compromise Street. The estimated construction costs have increased by $735,000, and we have been under design for a while. And we're a state grant for $700,000 was received for this coming year that the governor put in his budget. We're close to the final design. We're still working with the designer very diligently daily. Does anyone have any questions?
Nope.
Where's Ellie when we need her?
I think I have a question. No, I know I have a question. How does this mesh with the whole city dock reconfiguration?
So this project is just for the Compromise Street side. the city dock revitalization is going to be on the Dock Street side. Primarily, there's going to be some along the seawall, but this will address the storm drain issues on the compromised street side with the tidal water coming up through the storm drain system and onto the streets.
So
That
it
won't
goes all,
address Dock Street at all.
it goes all the way down to Newman Street?
It does. Yeah, that's the main part is right there at Newman Street. That's where most of the flooding occurs on the compromised street side.
David,
Okay.
how, when we're also considering what to do with Hillman Garage and whether we're going to go below grade for that, below the water table, will there be some kind of planning needed to mesh this with taking stuff away from the French drain on the Hillman Garage if it goes below the water table?
No, I think those are mainly separate issues, really. Yeah.
Separate is good.
Well, if it does go below level and they have to start dewatering, that'll be a constant dewatering process if they do that. So we'll have to at least figure out where that water is going to go when they dewater that site. So that may be a small factor, but I don't think it's going to be a really significant consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Onette?
Yes.
So, on this project, it seems like we're going to do as much as we can until we get the FEMA grant. Is that a fair statement?
Well, we got a pretty positive outlook from OEM. I think we're almost at the end of the road on the FEMA grants.
Yeah, this is the project that uses the FEMA grant. So
Right.
We've done all of the work that's required, all the archaeological work, as Dave Mandel mentioned the other day. We've done all that, and that's imminent. And they've been holding that money for us for these several years it's taken to get to this point.
Right.
But we're not planning to bid this until later this year. We're wrapping up design, and it'll be bid later this year. So we're very confident that by the time we're ready to award the construction contract, that we'll have that $3 million.
There's a sidebar effort here on the Capitol Memorial placement. Is that still scheduled to be on this site?
It is, yeah.
Oh,
it
okay.
is. So
that-
yeah, so that site, so it's the site of the park right there along Compromise.
Yeah.
So that site will be graded and reworked. Part of it's going to be for the wet well.
Yeah.
For this system, and then part of it's going to be handed over for the memorial. So that'll happen early. We'll do the grading, we'll do the archaeological investigation of that area. Then we'll keep our part of the site, and we're going to turn the rest of the site over for the memorial.
Okay. And then lastly, in the meantime, Ross might want to hear that is that DPW is doing a temporary, sort of temporary, like we did on the other side with the pump at the bottom of Newman.
Yeah, so that's in place. It is temporary, but if you look down towards the end of Newman Street, down by the water, you'll see some large orange equipment pumps that are down.
Yeah.
That are almost steadily pumping water.
Yeah.
So that's all in place. We blocked off that storm drain. It's a very large storm drain, 48 inches or so, that comes down Newman Street to the water there. So we completely blocked that off. That's like a wet well behind it where that storm water gathers because it can't flow into Eagle Alley now. And so it gets pumped into
So
Eagle
that
Alley.
comes out of your operational budget, or, I mean, where are you getting that money? Thank you.
No, yeah, so some of that, because that was pretty significant cost, so that was using the stormwater fund, because it's a storm drain system, so we use some of our stormwater retrofit money to pay for that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next slide, please. This is another new project. We got a grant for $350,000 from the state. So the first thing we want to do is improve the playground at the Pitt Moyer Rec Center. And then we'll look at the other city parks and see what needs upgrading there for the remainder of the money.
So Marcia, you know that we have this big effort going on at the Eastport Elementary School. Is there any coordination between this general park category and that?
You know, not directly, but there could be. It depends after we do the first park, how much money remains. And then I think we'll work with Archie to do an assessment of the remaining parks and see where we might want to do the improvements. So there could be some tie-in.
Okay, so please remember me if that does develop, because I'll want to make a pitch for that. I think they're doing an incredible job raising their own money, and they've got a pretty nice design, but they probably will need some help if we can find it. And it'll be to the benefit of the city, and I think actually the approval of the apartment building in the Eastport Shopping Center is somewhat depending upon those improvements going on. Anyway, thank you.
Okay. Next slide, please.
Can I just
Go ahead.
on the Parks and Rec really quick?
Yes, please. Council members, please just speak up. I mean, there's no protocol here. When you have a question, raise your hand and speak up.
Okay. David, would it still be possible? I understand now, you know, things have changed due to the crisis, but would it still be possible to look at taking the existing playgrounds that HACA has and kind of, you know, putting that under the umbrella of the Parks and Rec program?
That certainly could be a discussion, you know, to be had with Hackett to see whether they would be supportive of that and what would be required to actually make that happen. But yeah, I think we could have that discussion. You and I talked about that before, and it seems like a good idea.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is the crab boating facility, the one that was discussed just a few minutes ago. And this needs some program open space money from both the city and the county. We need money from the state, and it's awaiting approval by DNR because there are many issues and when you do something like this.
Yeah, if I could just add one more comment. So DNR is the agency that's considering it. Has to go to the Board of Public Works ultimately for approval. So DNR would just make a recommendation to the Board of Public Works, but that board actually approves the use of the funding, the POS funding for this purpose.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this one is another new project. It's for a satellite police station in a community center in Eastport. And the thought is to use a residential HACA unit to provide additional police presence in Eastport. And $346,000 is requested for design, construction, and city overhead.
So Dewan, this is in your ward, but certainly has been agitated for by a lot of people from my ward. Where are you comfortable with this? Is this where you want to see it go?
I was holding my comment back. I guess, yeah. You know, I'm concerned always about the you know, what the people think in the perspective of, are we turning this into a quote unquote police state by, you know, having virtually a second police station headquartered in the middle of an apartment complex, which could be concerning. But I mean, I definitely, we've had the opportunity to hear from, you know, the chief and residents. So I think, I guess it's important that we move forward now.
So some of the discussion I've heard about it is that it's sort of quasi a secondary station, but also quasi kind of a community center gathering place. I've never really been fully I never fully understood exactly what the concept is. Combination substation and other things, it might be more palatable, but I guess like you, I'd like to hear more of the details on this. I know for years it was considered by previous chiefs of police not be a wise thing to do, and there does seem to have been a change in thinking. So I hope when we discuss this at the council at large, we can have a more a deeper discussion of all of the aspects of this.
I think I have to interject. David, Gerald, is this? Remember we had brainstorms about capital improvement projects, and I suggested fitting out a storefront. Is that what this is, David?
Yes, that's exactly what this is. So it's not just a police presence. The thought is that there would be some other community services in this center. The cost is relatively low because HACA would ask HUD if they could take one of the units out of operation and then turn it over to this. So we would definitely want to avoid the whole armed camp type of concept, which I think everybody's concerned about that. So that's why there was this brainstorming and thinking about what else this could be used for. So it's not just a police presence in these communities. This is still very conceptual, so there's not a lot of details. I think we would want to work with Alderman Gay, with community leaders, with others, and the police chief, obviously, to figure out what best to do with this center if it does get built.
Yeah, this was after a town hall on gun violence at Bay Ridge, and we were all discussing this, and then I threw in a brainstorm about fitting out an existing space, not necessarily a satellite police station. So that, I guess that starts this conversation. Thanks.
I have a question, and it goes back to where this came from. We used to have a substation in Eastport many years ago, and I think it was closed because it wasn't doing what it was expected to do. As Ross has said, we've heard from previous police chiefs who didn't think that was a good idea to spread resources in this fashion. Eastport has a community center there. So for us to be talking about creating a community center that's part of our police substation, I would just like to see more dialogue. And Alderman Gay mentioned the same thing. Has the community weighed in on this? Has the police chief? I mean, it's in our CIP. It's taken a big step to get it here, but should it be here already without all of these preliminary steps taking place? Has HUD agreed to forego the rent that this apartment would get for our substation, or are we expected to supplement them to cover the cost of the lost rent for the unit? I mean, there's any number of questions that I think need to be answered.
So we did some homework on this. So the police chief weighed in, and that was obviously one of the most critical factors, because you're right, past police chiefs have not supported this. This is a small town that response time is not really the issue, right? I mean, the police can get almost anywhere in the city very quickly from their current stations. So it's not response time, it's really more presence. And that's, Chief Jackson was very highly supportive of this, just for his community policing initiative, and to have officers. And it's not gonna be a whole another police station where you're gonna have 20 people in this building. It's gonna be maybe 1 or 2 at the most. But HACA likes the idea, and they have actually requested from HUD to get approval to do this. It wouldn't be at cost to the city. We wouldn't have to pay the rent for that. So we've done some of that homework. There was a lot of discussion of this at some of the community forums that we held after some of the shootings, and there seemed to be pretty broad support for this. But we weren't really convinced until Chief Jackson said that he thinks that will help police presence in that part of the community. So a lot more work needs to be done. A lot of those delve into some of those details that you brought up, but we've done some of that background work before we added to the CIP.
Would it be possible to because I like the general idea of investing in this community, but as Sheila mentioned, we have a community center in Eastport, a rather nice community center with 2 floors, and vacant rooms currently, and $346,000 is a lot of money. So would it be possible to take that existing balance of $346,000, or the requested balance, I'm sorry, and put that into the community center and bring in the programs that Patty does with the like the junior officers, and they do a really good job of reaching out into the community, keeping in touch with the kids and stuff like that. So I know this isn't the time to discuss this, but once we get further in the process, maybe to potentially talk about using that funding for a different project with the same outcome.
Yeah, no, I think so. If there's going to be space available in that building, that would be, in my mind, an even better option than taking a residential unit out of operation. And some family that wants to move in is no longer available to move into that because we have less units. And if that could be done, that would be great.
But Duan, I would argue this is exactly the time to be discussing it. There'll be this at finance, and then there'll be the time before the council writ large. I know what many in my community are saying about this, but I'm really wondering what the residents of that community, and Sheila, you have communities that could use the same kind of attention. So is this being viewed as a prototype or something that will be sent out to other public housing communities? And, if it proves to be a good thing, I don't know.
I think that leads to a larger discussion, really. But I really like the idea that Alderman Gay is bringing forward with attempting to find a space within the existing community center there, which really would give the officers a more global touch to the community, as opposed to them being separated into a unit. If they're an integral part of that community center and thus the community, they'd have a greater impact if there's space.
So more work to be done here, but I want to take a second just to thank Marcia and David. I think this is really a very constructive way to walk through the CIP. I'm finding it more helpful than any other year. So, and I will tell everybody that I've been admonished. We really do have to end fairly close to on time to give staff time to regroup for the afternoon session. So, but anyway, let's continue to move forward.
All right, next slide, please. Okay, so this one is scheduled to be an annual type of thing. It's for fitness equipment replacement at the Pitt Moyer Rec Center. It opened in 2010. Its equipment is getting older. This is a new project for this fiscal year, but we do want it to continue, and this would help us to cycle out the old equipment and cycle in new equipment and keep up with current technology and keep things in tip-top shape. All right, next slide. Okay, so this is our general roadways project. This is our paving program. We do $3 million worth of paving every year. We have about 90 miles of streets. We tried to get to 4.5 miles of paving per year to keep everything on a 20-year paving cycle. As we discussed during the operating budget, we didn't quite make it last year. We had some expensive streets that had to have the sub base also replaced, and that just added to the cost and didn't give us the ability to meet our 4.5 miles, but we're hoping to this year. We're on schedule too. All right, next slide. All right, so this is for our new Public Works Maintenance Facility. As you know, we've recently changed the location for its third possibility is now on Hudson Street. I think we've settled on this location. It's a really nice site, a good location in an industrial area. We are still coming to the final costs of everything because we are, we're still working with the designer on, we're finalizing our programming needs, and they're working on the design as we speak. This project the cost has increased over the years due to inflation. Our stormwater management regulations changed to become more stringent. We have to put the salt barn on Hudson Street and remove the fuel system at Spa Road, and those are all expenses that are quite significant. We're hoping to complete the design in 2021 and construction in 2022. Okay, does anyone have any questions?
Yes, so it's a corollary, and I'll get to you on. Question is, and I do support this moving forward, but it begs the question of learning at some point what the down the road planning is for the Spa Road area. So not germane to the CIP, but probably a point of curiosity for the council at some point. So I just throw that in the hopper. Juan, you had a question?
Yeah, I do. But really quickly, I agree, and I'll throw in my 2 cents while I have the opportunity with the land. I would love to see it used as a place to create affordable housing in the future. But so this kind of ties into what was going on earlier, what you guys were discussing earlier when I previously joined. So if we don't have an estimated cost for this, but it continues to increase due to the inflation, do you think that we would ever be at the point where we would need to borrow to complete this project, or are the funds available and just set aside until we can get to get to a final point like a completion with the project?
So some of the bonds have already been issued for this project. They were actually issued several years ago for this project, but we're going to have to get additional financing for the new site. So some of the funds that were already available that were financed years ago were used to acquire that site. There's still some funds available, but not enough to cover the construction. So that's why we have additional funding required in the FY21 CIP.
So if you look at page 31 of the CIP, you can see the land acquisition costs of $2.2 million and what's left over from the 5.8, and then the new monies. And I know this is a question that Alderman Savage is going to want to pursue. The new monies are $6.2 million. And that's not, I don't think it's nailed down yet, is that then?
My turn. Director Gerald, City Manager Gerald, did we have 5 million set aside in bond funding from the initial interest? Was that the amount?
Yeah. Yeah, that number that was in the prior year funding is the money that was set aside years ago for this project.
Okay, and so now the cost is $12 million, so it's more than doubled over time. I see that the land acquisition is gonna cost us 2.2 million.
That's what it did cost us. So we've acquired that site, and that's what it cost.
I would like for us to, and I'm speaking to the council now, to determine that we will set aside that amount when and if the property on Spa Road is dispatched with. So in other words, if we sell that property, out of the cost of the revenue that we generate from that property, I want 2.213 to go back into our capital improvement plan to replace the money that we spent to acquire that land. So that's something, food for thought, because it's, but I think we can put something in place to make sure that we bring that money back into the capital improvement plan.
So let's get that on our parking lot. There's more discussion, Fred?
Yeah, have
I'm
we
not,
gone,
so I have one more question. I'm sorry, I have one more question. According to the chart on page 31, there's no budgeting that's needed, no revenue needed in 22 and beyond. So the expectation is that this project will be completed and funded totally in 21?
It won't be completed, but it'll be totally funded with this additional money that we're asking for in 21. So we expect it to work on the design and hopefully be able to start bidding the construction within FY21, and then the construction will be finished after that. It'll go into 22 and be complete in calendar year 22.
Okay, thank you.
Fred?
have we gone to settlement on that property yet?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
The purchase has been completed.
So after we do this walkthrough committee and council members, we will need to go back to pages 10 and 11, because if you look at page 10, you can see this, the 6 point, whatever it is, million there for the capital, item 20004, and it's the $6,250,000 in the capital 21 budget. So it is, we will be issuing, I presume, Jody, bonds to cover this cost. Or are we going to be doing some bans? I don't know. I guess that's a question to come back to.
So, yes, we will be issuing debt for this project in 21, presuming the other proceeds, idle proceeds that are sitting still, have been used by other projects. If you remember, we took all of the old bond proceeds and allocated them to all projects in process so we could use them up on a first come, first served basis. So the 4 million, don't know if that will all be issued this next year. We'll have to see what the progress of the project is. And we are issuing a debt not based on projects, but based on anticipated spending for the projects. So if we, for instance, on that I say 4 million, but it's actually the 6 million is all bonds there. And it's bonds from the different funds that are going to be residing at the location. And if we sell that 6 million, it may not be in 21 as bands or bonds. It could be spread across 21 and 22, and maybe in 23 if the construction stretches out that far.
Thank you.
We're not going to sell the debt until we need it.
Jody, I would hope that we would make every effort to not hold up the project, because I heard you say you're only going to bond market every 2 years.
Okay, so we will be issuing debt every year, whether it's bands, which is a short-term form of debt,
Okay.
or bonds. So if I do a little bit of this in bands in the fall, this coming fall, and then the following fall, we would issue bonds and we would pay off the short-term line and then issue long-term for the current construction. So we would keep up with it that way. There will be no holdup of the construction project because of the issuance of the debt.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one is for the Mayor and Burgess House, another project that has been around for many years, come and gone. We are getting closer to completion. We are expecting a $100,000 grant from the African American Heritage Preservation Program, but we need 100% match, and we're hoping to complete it during this next year. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, there has been discussion off and on about the Captain Burtis House in the Maynard Burtis as a place office space. There's problems with the second floor, but one of the things that I've spoken with, and that's just me, Dr. Leone about is we have a real wealth of African-American artifacts in our archaeological collection. And I also talked with Robert Clark about this. It seems like this would be a good place to have those on display, maybe in a rotating collection. So I guess for my colleagues on the council, I'd like to have some time when we discuss that. Clearly, we've been overdue in getting this building back restored, and I think it is part of our cultural history in the city that we could really take advantage of. But how we take advantage of that is somewhat of an open question.
So this next project is gonna it's gonna renovate the first floor. So the second floor will still be in sort of the rough condition it is now. But the plan is to include exhibit space. So exactly what you're talking about is that there's gonna be exhibit space, as well as some sort of like a meeting room for city meetings, another venue for smaller meetings to make use of that. I don't think it's gonna be suitable for offices or gonna be planned for that, but it would be more as a meeting venue for small meetings with exhibit space.
Sheila, you're disappointed, I'm sure.
Well, I'm going to ask the question, has the renovation secured the second floor? Because that was one of the weaknesses in this building, if I remember correctly. So now is the second floor usable space? I mean,
No,
even though
it's-
it's not renovated or anything.
No, I mean, it's not in danger of falling down or anything like that, but it's not usable. It's still very rough up there. So this is going to fix up the first floor only. At some point in the future, we'll continue to ask for grants. The African American Heritage Preservation Program is very interested in funding additional work in there in the future. And there's actually a third floor up if you go way up in there. So the future plans would be to address both of those, but this one provides an ADA compliant restroom off the back and then fixes up the interior space on the first floor.
And if we're talking about using this as an exhibit space, we have to think about curators or somebody that's going to have to manage the space as well as the artifacts. So.
Yeah, and that may be HA or it may be somebody else, we're not sure. HA has always been very interested in this facility. You'll recall that after we weatherized the facility, there was some thought that HA would then take over the facility. That didn't work out because they weren't able to get funding for that. But they're still very interested in that facility, and I think maybe they could fill that role as the curator for the exhibits.
Brad?
Thank you. Let me get this straight. We're spending $1.1 million to fix the first floor only? Do I understand that correct?
No, so the 1.1 million is all of the prior money. So that building was just about ready to fall down when we first took it over. So we've had, I think two or three separate phases. I think this will be the third phase of construction. The first one was just to stabilize it so it wasn't going to fall down. The second, which was done a few years ago, was to weatherize the exterior so we didn't have rain and wind blowing into the facility like we had. So that's all winterized. Now we're ready to fix the inside. So that's all the prior year expenditures. That
we get all that for 1.1 million?
Well, that's been spent. They're only proposing an additional 210,000.
I see that.
So we spent
Okay.
the money David mentioned already.
Yeah, it's very expensive to do historical preservation. I mean, each of those boards on the outside of the building that you can see in the picture here had to be individually taken off. The nails were historic, so the nails had to be taken off separately. Where the pieces failed when they were taken off, we had to do an exact duplication of that piece to put it back. So that was an incredibly tedious and detailed project when we did the weatherization of that facility.
Okay, thank you.
Is the plan to see this maybe in the next couple of years, utilizing the actually bringing in income?
Good question.
If we could, that would be a bonus. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that we'll get to that point, but if we were able to get HA to take over the sort of the operations of the facility, they may be able to implement something like that. I don't think the city should be in that business to run a museum, frankly.
So, Dewan, a few years ago, HA launched their 99 Objects program, which was to celebrate 99 different things that represent the city of Annapolis. And at that time, there was a notion that the 99 Objects would also set out a course where you could tour the city by foot and go to where those 99 objects were housed. And this Maynard Burge is prominently in that. I haven't heard much about that lately, and maybe we ought to invite HA to come talk to the council and see where that's going. I think to some extent, HA and the city have been in competition over various properties like the Captain Berta's house and docks downtown. So maybe that's why we haven't had a close interaction. But I think, I do think there's an opportunity to generate some revenue. I really love the idea of this building being a showplace for free African Americans in the city, because that's what this house was by two different families, and also a place to have a rotating display of all of that huge collection of artifacts that Dr. Leone. But that's just my concept. I think that the council needs to take a lead in having a dialogue on the CIP affords us that very opportunity. So I think we do need to put it on the parking lot and have some more discussion at finance, and then discussion at council meeting, and probably discussion after we pass the budget, if we pass the budget.
Next.
Sheila, you need to be paying attention, because I think we're about ready to flip over page 33.
I'm looking at it right now. It's Russell Street, and I don't see anything. Even giving up on Russell Street.
No, we're just not asking for additional funding this year. That's been a problem, and I guess somebody's probably on, maybe Sam's on, they can talk more about that, but we've had a very difficult time figuring out who owns what property along that street so that we can have space to install the sidewalks that are needed. But anyway, that's not on the list because we haven't asked for money in FY21 for that.
I know, but it's on my list. So stay on it.
Sam, are you on? Can you quickly give us a little 25-word summary of where we are in Russell?
Sure. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. As we started to work on Russell Street, we did not show that we own that street by. Here, pull my mask off. Not sure that we own that street by deed. And so we have gone back in, we've had some title work done, and we have continued not to be able to find out who owns the roadbed there. We can find records for properties coming up to it on the east and the west, but we can't find anything for where that street actually resides. So what we're going to do is we're going to make that part of the design contract for the design firm to actually find out who owns that stretch of ground. There was some suspicion that that was actually the old Germantown Elementary School site. But in trying to put the deeds together, it does not appear that that's where it was. And unfortunately, the people who we could ask that question of are progressively not being around anymore. So that's where our status is on that right now.
Sam, that would not have been part of the Bates High School property?
It does not appear to be, it doesn't appear to be that. I reached out to some of my older associates who talked about where their parents went to school. And it seems that the old Germantown Elementary School was on West Street, somewhere in that vicinity. But we haven't been able to tie that down as actually being the site. It seems that the old Bates High School came in through Smithville. That was their access. We can't find anything that shows anything different.
Okay. Well,
Does
there,
Jane McWilliams have anything to help us with all of her historical research?
I have not spoken to Jane about that. I could do that. We had a title abstractor try to pull the detail on that, and we're just completely unsuccessful. They could not find anything. We could not find anything. We searched through it. There seems to be a lot of discrepancy in the property work on that south side of West Street.
Janice Hayes Williams may also be a good resource for you. I think it was her uncle who put up the money for that property where Bates was originally built.
Yeah, that's Paul, what was the name of property where Bates was? Or
Pardon me?
Bates is. That I think was the old, I want to say Buena Vista subdivision. The Nueva Villa subdivision. And the Bates High School wound up taking a significant portion of those lots. The only thing that still remains of those lots, I believe, is what's on South Villa Street. Otherwise, they were pretty much taken up by the Bates High School complex.
That subdivision actually ends at South Villa. It doesn't go west of South. So that strip of lots is separate. It's something else its own.
Yeah. Paul just is kind of talking into my ear here. He tells me that that's actually South Villa was actually the border of that subdivision.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well,
we'll put this on our Finance Committee parking lot and come back to it during our deliberations. I know this is near and dear to your heart as Barwood Lane was to Ken's.
Mm-hmm.
We'll keep at it.
And the seniors who live there, I mean, you know.
Are you able to, at some point, just take control of the land if you aren't able to figure out who actually owns it?
That's a question for the Office of Law, but Sheila's point is, this is a life safety issue. It's having proper sidewalks and facilities for people so they're walking in the road and they're not walking in mud puddles and things. So I'm with you, Sheila. I support you on this, and we'll figure out what we need to do to.
And I think for the purpose of the CIP, we feel like it's fully funded. As soon as we're able to figure out the land ownership and see if we need to acquire any of the land, and then start the design, then we may come back in the future and say, you know, there's additional funding required. But we think right now that the funding we have is adequate to move forward.
Good to know. Thank you.
All right, moving on.
Okay, now we are on to South-Southwood Sidewalk and Stormwater Management. We're ready to begin planning to determine, again, we're gonna have rights-of-way issues similar. Hopefully we have better historical records in this area. And we'd like to begin construction in FY23. And we're requesting an additional $52,500 in this cycle. And this project is to put in new sidewalks, which would be ADA compliant, some curb and gutter to improve drainage, some roadway reconstruction where needed, stormwater management, improvements to address both drainage and to treat the impervious area. So anyway, we'd like to get moving on this one. We get a lot of complaints from the residents there. Next slide. Oh,
or Ward 3. Never mind.
Yeah, I'm not sure which ward that is in. Sorry.
Okay.
Next slide, please. So this is another project that's been ongoing for a couple years, our standard specification and construction details. And I think this money might have been programmed in from previous years. And we are proposing that it's a mix of general fund, water fund, and sewer funding for the whole project. These details have to do with everything in the public right of way, which is a mix of all of those funds. So, you know, the general fund would be like roads, you know, water and sewer would fund their own issues that relate to our details, because we really need to finish this project, but we are hoping it will be done in December of this year. We're working with Anne Arundel County and their consultant, and our details will be specific to Annapolis, but work in conjunction with Anne Arundel counties. Next project. Oh, do you have any questions, Alderwoman?
Well, where is this? I'm not clear. It's so general. Is it just general specifications?
Yeah, so what it is, so that picture that is on there is actually the book that I received when I started working here. I hate to say this, in 1988. I'm giving away my age, but so that's the last time they were redone. So many things are outdated, and we want to put them online. So it's not exactly a project. I mean, it's a project to put it together, but it is details for every single capital project, every single developer that does anything in Annapolis. This gives them the details of how we want our items to work. So we are consistent with how we have a manhole built, or, you know, what material the water lines are made of, or, you know, what type of roadway has to have what type of base or and an asphalt.
So in essence, this is a log of all of our capital projects and the specifications for each. It's more of a general document to guide every capital project. So it's not a log of the projects themselves, it's the guide for anyone who constructs anything in the public right of way. And it's the details they are required to use. Okay.
Is that clear?
I understand. Thank you.
Okay.
And I'm glad to see we have it.
Yes, me too. This one is very important. I know it's not very glamorous, but it is a very important project.
Okay.
Sheila, I'm looking on the ward maps and I can't find this road, Southwood, on there, but I guess.
I think Fred would know when he gets on.
Russell Street? What?
No.
Southwood. It's opposite where the new library is.
So is that your ward or Ward 3?
No, it's Rhonda's by a block.
Okay. Okay.
All right. All right, so are we ready to move on?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this next project is Trail Connections, another one near and dear to my heart. So we are trying to implement the recommendations from the city's bicycle master plan and improve connectivity throughout the city. And the funding requested this year will be used for planning, land acquisition, design, and construction of what we now call the West East Expressway, well, and other trail segments, but We're going to try to focus on the West East Expressway, which we like to call WE, and that is kind of the Poplar Trail extended that goes behind the businesses along West Street. And we have applied for some grant funding, so we're hoping to get that to move that one along. Okay, next project. This one is the Truxton Park Tennis Courts project, I think, and it's pickleball courts too. I think you've heard some updates on this along the way. So the project in total is to refurbish the 12 tennis courts, and we have started on all of them. We ran into problems on some of the courts. The sub base was actually non-existent, so we're requesting an additional $420,000 so that we can complete the remaining courts. Now, we expect to have some of them ready later this spring. Our weather hasn't been extremely cooperative for paving. It's been getting cold at night, which hasn't helped, but we do expect to have some of the courts finished this spring, but we need this money in order to finish the others. Any questions?
I haven't heard from Phyllis Emmett, so they must be happy.
Okay, good.
Not necessarily.
I do have a question, but it's not about the tennis courts and pickleball courts. Did we skip traffic signal rehabilitation, or did I just miss it?
No new funding was requested, but we actually have an update on that one if you'd like to hear it, because we're pretty excited that we are finally moving ahead on that one. We have a consultant on board to who's going to review the 23 traffic signals that we own and maintain in Annapolis. They're going to be inspected and evaluated for repair, upgrade, and replacement recommendations. We're going to do a prioritization schedule. So this is good that we're finally going to be getting to this part, and you know, it's kind of helpful to have less traffic right now, so that it's easier to do the inspections without so many vehicles on the road.
So is this consultant in lieu of a new traffic engineer?
No, no, we're still actively trying to get a traffic engineer who, especially after we get this initial report, we'll need someone to really move it along, and we are still searching for a traffic engineer. And it's my understanding it's still in the budget.
Thank you.
Right. It's still in the
Marcia,
budget.
the reason I asked the question is because there is funding requested in the out years for the traffic signals. So I know this year.
Yes, well, this year is just well, we're using existing money, but to do the evaluation. So the out years would be actual improvements, and it could, you know, it could be a total signal replacement, or it could be, you know, replacing parts of signals. Our traffic signals are very old, so I think we're going to see a lot of replacements, which it's very expensive to do that, but it's worthwhile. We don't want a catastrophic failure.
Just a bit of information for everyone, but particularly my colleagues on the council. The Forest Drive Port Sector Study Task Force Group has continued to work. In fact, they had a meeting last night, and the partnership between the city, the county, and the state has really grown quite robust. And traffic lights are certainly one of the things that they're looking at. And I'm really quite pleased that I think we've always had a good relationship between the different governmental jurisdictions, but I think there's a more willingness to talk to each other. I think there was sort of oh, that's the city, let's leave them alone. We don't know what they're doing. They're kind of crazy there, sort of thing. And I think that has changed dramatically. And when that group reports back to the council in response to our resolution, I think we're going to hear more about coordinating signal lights between the city, the county, and the state. And clearly the city is the entity that has the most investment to do. Some of our stoplights, I swear, have candles in them that people have to light every night. So there will be more coming from another front on this to the council.
I'd like to add a brief aside. Yesterday, the light went up at West Street in Gibraltar. I don't think it's on yet, but it's installed. So we're moving ahead. Thank you.
All right, we are starting to run out of time. We may have to have a discussion of the capital budget bumped over to the next session. Takia, am I correct that the only thing we have for the afternoon, not only because it's an important thing, but the only thing on the agenda is the capital grants?
No, finance has their presentation as well.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Well, we'll have to see where we go. Again, I was asked by IT to not run over egregiously because they need a while to get reset up for the afternoon meeting. So let's see how we proceed here. To that end, Marcia, go on.
Okay, next slide, please.
Dennis, really quick.
Yes.
So with the additional funding, and most of them are not complete. I just rode by the other day. I did see that they had started the project. Would it be possible to move maybe 2 of the 12 courts to locations where other communities can access them? Maybe putting them near already a park that the city already owns or something like that?
You are grabbing a tiger by the tail. I think we do need more courts, but oh my God, you just don't know all of the negotiations that have gone on.
If you just hold out on 2 of them.
I think the mayor has in mind, in part of his discussions with the housing authority and getting more facilities on their property. I think there's some discussions with the Y of Central Maryland for Harbor House. I think we do need to have that discussion go on, but I don't know that we want to open this can of worms back up.
That was my just, kind of concern, is that I know that we had talked about putting some of the facilities on Hacker properties. And I think, well, I mean, if they're asking for the money, $420,000, and they haven't put all the courts down, why, we could just move 2 around.
Well, the courts are there. The courts are being, as Marcia said, the sub base has got to be fixed. They haven't been repaired in a long time. The controversy was what goes on, what lines go on the courts. Is it tennis lines or pickleball lines? And I think we have an approachment for now, but I take your point, the point that Robert E. continually makes too, that we need to have outdoor places for all of our kids to play, both because they get the recreation and exercise, but also they're not doing other things that are less productive.
Okay, so the next project that needs funding is the Tucker Street boat ramp, and this project's been around a while too. So this current project is proposed to demolish the existing deteriorated ramp and build a new ramp and an ADA compliant dock and a kayak launch. And we would like to start design during this year and permit, bid, and construct later. And we are requesting $170,250.
So, Marcia, I don't know whether we want to talk about this here or on the waterway improvement projects, but I have to say for everyone that I got a huge amount of email and phone calls when Beth Bellis was talking about the floating docks down on the long dock on City Dock, and not about floating docks back at street ends where they used to be. So I don't know whether, and I see you're going to be talking about waterway improvement projects, but either here or there, I want to put an oar in the water, as it were, and talk about street and docks and so forth.
Yes, yes. I
And
think
we'll be
talk
talking about
that.
that with the waterway improvements. Just one note on this. This was originally going to be funded with those types of funds, but there was no way at this location we could meet all the requirements for using those types of funds as far as parking and public access goes. So this will be funded with city funds instead.
But the only real problem was parking. We pretty much had everything else going for us.
Right.
We did have alternate parking plans, but they were not satisfactory to DNR. And that's why we are where we are.
I always just park in Fred's driveway when I'm taking my boat into the water.
Well, you got a long walk from my house to Tucker Street.
Sorry, moving on.
Okay, so this next project is the Waterway Improvement Project. So this is annual funding received from DNR, and as discussed, the harbor master is really the one who's moving a lot of this along. Engineering is providing a lot of assistance to manage the actual projects, but we do have a list of potential projects. I'm not sure of her priority. But 3rd Street, Conduit Street, Amos Garrett, Cheston Ave, and Thompson Street. And so we are hoping to use $99,000 a year to move these ahead. So and there's currently a project to put a floating pier at Lafayette Park. So I'm not sure the status. I think we're having a hard time getting contractors to actually bid on it right now. But anyway, we're hoping to move that one along soon.
These floating docks are surprisingly expensive and often fragile. I think they get kicked around by storms, but it really is a very important part of allowing citizens access to the water. We had a run on street and parks going away for a while. I think we've staunched that, but I would certainly like to put this on a parking lot issue for us to talk about at the Finance Committee and then with the council. And I definitely want to talk about floating docks on the, or not, on the long dock at City Dock, a dock that I don't think we even have possession of it, but it's definitely one of those quality of life issues in the neighborhood, and I think has some policy aspects to it that we as council members ought to be weighing in on. So that's my 2 cents on this one.
Marcia, is this Cheston Avenue or Chester Avenue? Chester Avenue as in Eastport?
No, Cheston Avenue, which is in Murray Hill.
Okay. Thank you. All right, almost finished. One more.
This is the final general fund project, and then we do have a few enterprise fund projects, but hopefully they'll go very quickly. So this project is for the Weems Well and Field, which, as you know, was used as a trash incinerator. The ash was disposed of there in the 40s. We've been working with Maryland Department of the Environment to review the data and determine what is actually needed. We have requested another $52,500 to complete the planning and any testing that is required.
So we're not, this doesn't include the actual remediation, it looks like?
No.
Yeah, the remediation shown in 22 next year. So this is just to
okay,
figure out
sorry.
what needs to be done and then do if there's any design required, which there shouldn't be much to add a soil layer on top of the field. And this is intended to keep it as a recreation field, not to prepare it for housing. The rest of the site would be potentially housing, but this would maintain a playing field.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I didn't see that.
Okay, Ellie, I don't think you're going to be interested in the next one. We'll just skip over page 45.
May I ask very quickly, David, I think I asked this question of Archie, but I don't recall the answer. Are the fields usable in the interim?
Well, it depends on who you talk to, I guess. You know, because we're being extremely safe and conservative, we've taken them out of use. I think they're probably still okay, frankly, myself, but until we hear from BGE that they're good to go, in the interim, until we do the final, whatever is going to be needed, we're not going to put them back in operation until they give us the thumbs up.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, do we want to continue, or it is 1 minute to 12?
Well, I think I heard Marcia say the next ones. I don't know that Hillman Garage is going to be a quick one. But I think we can run maybe 20 minutes over, but we cannot go much beyond that. And we haven't really talked about the capital budget directly. So I'd like to continue for a little bit longer and see if we can at least get through the CIP, if that's okay with the committee.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think that rather than hurry through this thing, some of these are quite important. Why don't we just come back, add this on to another day and, do it when we have time to consider it in a more appropriate way.
If that's the sense of the committee, that's fine with me. As Marcia, is that going to be a problem for you to regroup with us?
No problem at all.
Okay.
Well, I am looking, it's 4 projects, Marcia, correct me if I'm wrong, and only one is seeking funding in 21, right?
Actually, it's more than that because we've got the gas.
Okay.
Station, and David, are we going to be getting into that new, organic resource recovery? Fred is correct. These are some biggies, as well as.
We've got 6 projects and then 1 summary for the full CIP for the out years. So a total of 7 slides we have to go over yet.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was just looking at the parking fund. We still have all the other.
Oh, yeah.
Can I make a suggestion?
Please.
So if you wanted to pick this up in the afternoon, and then we can do community grants, and then if I don't have time for my presentation, we can push it to another time because I'm here every day, as you know.
I like the sounds of that, and also I think that gives you more time. I know you're under the gun running around doing several different things. So
well, I've already finished the presentation and sent it to you, but it would give me more time to. I don't think I'd send you another document. I think I'll stick with what I have, but it would give me more time to prepare for the discussion. That's it. I'm ready now, and I'm flexible.
Committee, how does that sound to you? Pick up the rest of this after lunch, then do the community grants, and then push finance presentation back one more slot, or 1 more day.
That's fine with me, Mr. Chair.
That works for me. Do we have the community grants document?
Yeah, we got it this morning.
Yeah, it was sent this morning. I guess I'm up for a motion to amend the agenda and then adjourn for the morning session.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, again, thank you, Marcia and David. This was really a very comfortable way, at least for me, to go through the CIP. It was very organized, and I appreciate your effort. And we'll see you again in the afternoon.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. 1 o'clock, Mr. Chair.
All in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you. See you at 1 o'clock.